Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Movie Magpies, where we will be reviewing Knives Out. As always, I'm your host, Will, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Monique. Now, without any further ado, let's just get straight into it. So, for people who don't know, as this is the review, Monique, what is Knives Out about?
The Netflix summary for Knives Out is a detective unravels the tangled web of secrets and lies surrounding the death of a successful crime novelist and his unsettling eccentric family. Which is pretty one-to-one, really.
Yeah, no, that's very accurate. I like that summary a lot because it does really get the gist of what this movie is about.
We've found a lot of summaries for movies can either miss the actual heart of the story or sort of tweak / not even cover the whole plot. So This one is a really nice ratio of things.
Yeah, and I guess it is fitting for a movie that is a mystery, and a movie based around a mystery and around collecting clues, that the summary should be just the clear-cut summary, the bare bones of the story.
Yeah, you don't want to add anything else in, otherwise you end up almost spoiling the movie.
Yeah, giving too much away, and I think this summary does a really good job. But with the summary out of the way, let's talk a little bit more about the film. So
this one's going to be a bit hard to not spoil just because of how much depth is in this movie.
Yeah.
Personally, I know I have to be very careful when I'm saying things. I do want to say right off the bat, I love the introduction to this movie with the violin.
Yeah.
It's just
well, we could start with the music.
So well.
With that said, audio. So the music is just genuinely really nice, and it really blends into the atmosphere so well, though it does stand out as well as a byproduct.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it intends to do that as well, because it's very strong violin and string instrument, kind of almost a instrumental accompaniment of the film, and it really lends well to this grandiose kind of depiction of classic detective stories. It really fits the atmosphere and the mood of the film so well.
I really enjoy the atmosphere of this film. I really like that it does lean quite heavily into that murder mystery element with its music and its setting. Even the set design is very murder mystery, very clue board, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is a really nice way of describing it, because it does really fit into it with even beyond the setting of the set dressing, the wild kind of setup of characters, the eclectic set of characters, if you will, and just the general looming knowledge that there is a murderer within their midst. And, well, no, there isn't really, is there? They believe that it's a suicide from the beginning.
It's really interesting the way that this movie starts up, because we're led to believe that it's suicide, but of course we're investigating the death because there's so much that doesn't make sense with it.
And we're given the sense that there is more to this mystery than just a simple suicide, because one of our main characters in the forefront is a private detective who has been hired specifically to solve this mystery, so you know that there is more going on.
Yeah, and it's very, very interesting the way that this murder mystery works. Of course, going into any murder mystery, you always assume that someone who you're talking to is going to be suspicious. And I really, really love the way that this film does that. You are always constantly questioning all the characters, like in a good murder mystery.
Yeah.
Unless you're really, really following along with the story, because of course the clues are always there. You don't have any clue how this is going to end up.
No, absolutely not. And I think if we jump across to the meat of the film being the characters really do an incredibly good job of making us very aware that they can't fully be trusted, and that there is clearly just little dippings of deception throughout all of their stories. And I find that really, really interesting and refreshing, that we're also given insight to discern the truth from their interviews and from their behavior without our hands being held.
Exactly. And speaking on characters, the cast that plays the character, the actors and the actresses, we have a lot of big names in this lineup, a lot of very recognizable faces. Yet, especially due to the more eclectic and, dare I say, eccentric nature of the family, just like the summary says, it's the death of a very successful crime novelist, and
Yeah.
therefore a lot of his family is rich and eccentric,
Yeah.
which means that there's this really nice seamless blend of recognizable actors and actresses and the lesser known actors and actresses that they use in this movie. Like, it's done really, really well. You don't feel like
Yeah.
anybody was put in as a cameo. They all are there to play the role, and they were meant to play that role. You can just tell that they all really, really enjoyed playing their characters.
Yeah, absolutely. That said, I think I probably disagree with you a little bit there, in that I just want to get my point across that in this film, I think a lot of the actors do an incredible job of depicting their characters with a sense of familiarity to each other. I mean, specifically the family, in that you can tell exactly where some of their behaviors came from, and you can recognize the familial kind of attachment or chemistry within the family dynamic, but then you also are given enough subtle and unique differences to make each character incredibly interesting and incredibly compelling as individuals, which I think is really, really good. In regards to the actors kind of all standing out on their own, I think for sure with such an A-list cast, it would be a huge risk just generally getting a big ensemble like this. And I think for the most part it does it really well. I do think, however, that in this cast there are a few who do stand out stronger than others. I think Lakeith Stanfield is incredibly good as... I don't know his character's name, but he's incredibly good in his part. And he does actually do his kind of almost exhausted detective kind of character a great deal of justice. And then on the other scale of it, there are certain actors within this who clearly have a little less experience, and because they're put in with a group of other actors who are far more experienced, you see it more evidently.
That's interesting that you say that, because I didn't really pick up on that. I suppose the only one that I could think of is the actor that plays the son of...
Oh, right, Jaden Martell.
Yeah, I think his name was Jacob.
Yeah.
In the movie, and that's literally just because he is more of a secondary character.
Yeah, well, that I guess I can probably speak a little more openly about it. I think the kids don't necessarily stand out very positively in terms of acting, but that's because they have just a great deal less experience than a lot of the other actors. And as a result...
Which is super interesting, because I thought that for the characters that they were playing, I feel like they did a really good job of playing to their strengths in making them teenagers. For instance, so Catherine Langford was in 13 Reasons Why.
Yeah.
Thank you. I cannot speak tonight. And then she went on to appear in Love, Simon, which is also a really acclaimed movie. Like, it was quite popular at the time that it came out.
Yeah.
So putting her in Knives Out as this sort of person that feels entitled to a little bit, of course, her whole thing being that she absolutely hates Jacob, the character, because he is pretty much the same as her, but with opposite mindset. I feel like they really did well sort of showing what happens when you put two teenagers who are at a family event because they have to be in a room.
Yeah, and I think in that respect, yeah, absolutely. But moving on to just a little bit more broadly talking about the story, I think Knives Out really works well with its use of foreshadowing, because it's using a consistent level of foreshadowing, and as we seem to be talking about pretty much almost every single week, the use of Chekhov's gun in this film is actually incredibly intentional and really well done.
Yeah, honestly, I genuinely love this movie for the reasons of the foreshadowing and the use of Chekhov's gun, because it doesn't matter how many times I watch this film, I always pick up on a new hint or piece of foreshadowing or extra detail in the background that I didn't the last time I watched it. And I have actually seen this film 4 or 5 times now, once when it came out in cinemas, and then pretty much almost once a week leading up to this podcast, because when it first came out on Netflix, we watched it, of course, to take notes on the podcast, and for the podcast, I should say, and then again with my family because they wanted to watch it at one of our movie nights, and I just was obsessed with it.
Yeah, no, it does a really good job of showing off that use of story and how to actually really present Chekhov's gun and foreshadowing in a really insightful and interesting way, because ultimately this is a murder investigation, so things are going to keep coming back up and become relevant, and the point of Chekhov's gun is that if something is introduced to the audience, it should have a use or a relevance to the story, otherwise you're wasting the audience's time. And Knives Out really goes to town on that belief. And as a result, pretty much everything you see on screen actually has a purpose and will come back later, be useful later, or will be integral to the investigation at some point. And I think that's just masterful writing.
They even do this with the characters to a certain extent, which I really, really
The
love.
characters even have a sense of Chekhov's gun, which is great, where some of their personality traits are in itself a Chekhov's gun.
Yeah, I do really, really love the characterization in this movie, and I suppose that's why I do disagree with you a little bit in where you say that a couple of the characters don't stand out, and that is because
I don't mean that necessarily as characters, I mean that more specifically in the acting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because I feel that, definitely the kids or the younger members of the cast. They're acting as a little weaker, and as a result it does make sense that they are on screen for a little bit less.
Yeah, it does make sense, and I think they've really beautifully wound that into the story.
Yeah, they found a nice balance for that, I think.
That's just another thing to sort of say with winding the characters into the story. We have a lot of main characters in this. Out of a lot of the movies that we've watched, I think this one has one of the longest cast lists.
Yeah, and I don't think it has a specific main character as well. Genuinely, I don't think it. Even with Marta, I think she doesn't she serves as like the focus point for sure, but she's not really the main character or protagonist in any more of a sense than Benoit is, or
I think that's something that we'll circle
or even
back
Harland
to.
is even really.
Yeah, I think we'll circle back to that in the in-depth, because I
Yeah.
do have a couple thoughts about that, but they are a bit spoilery.
Yeah.
I just was saying, with the amount of characters that they have, the runtime for this movie is 130 minutes. So it's a pretty lengthy movie. It's just over 2 hours long. The pacing is phenomenal. There is not a point where I feel like this movie is dragging on. And if I do feel like it's dragging a scene out, it is to create tension. It's not just dragging for any given reason.
And actually the pacing is a really good point, because I noticed something about it specifically, is that the pacing is remarkably well done in that it feels quick and it feels like it goes at a really nice pace, but in certain parts there is actually some very clever camera trickery going on, where because in certain sections the camera is moving, we're given this sense of momentum, and as a result these moments feel faster despite actually being about the same speed as other scenes, and we're almost given the illusion of faster pacing in certain scenes in a way that actually makes the film feel even faster, which is amazing filmmaking for sure.
Yeah, and I just cannot praise this movie enough. I know that we usually do critique movies to a certain extent, but I feel like I don't have that many bad things to say about this movie.
Yeah, I do have critiques, because I do want to be a little more critical more in some of these films. As you know, in some of our previous reviews I've been just positing positives all the time, so I've been searching for critiques. One of them was just the acting, and that some of the actors definitely are weaker, and because so many of the other actors, such as like Jamie Lee Curtis, Daniel Craig, Christopher Plummer, some very well-known, incredible actors. As a result, the actors like Catherine Langford and Jaden Martell are just a little bit weaker as a result, and of course that's alleviated by their presence on screen being a lot less. And then another one of my kind of points was that Marta's vomit response feels a bit plot convenient at points, but
I do agree with you there. But
yeah, as my own devil's advocate for that point, because I'll do that too, because ultimately with critique, if you can dispute it, then ultimately the critique means nothing. But as a critique to my own critique, I think that this film doesn't take itself immensely seriously, and as a result it can have a Bond-esque flaw in it, in that with the Bond villains they always have a clearly defined visible physical flaw. With this film, Marta's vomiting at lying, it's used not in a super serious way, but also as a means to ensure that the audience also knows where the truth can come from and where the truth is derived from, because we have so many characters who are either loose with the truth or intentionally deceptive. We have one character who is certain in the truth. And even when we have a character like Benoit, who isn't necessarily lying, but he does not have all the facts. So as a result, his retelling or understanding of the events leading up to the death and beyond are never going to be fully accurate.
Yeah, his perception is inherently flawed by the fact that he wasn't there. And yes, he's a very good detective and he can pick up all of these clues.
Yeah.
But inherently, he is still going off what he can get, and he's not going to get all of the information just by nature, by proxy. That's how it works, really. I did want to, when you said devil's advocate there about the movie being a little more camp, like it doesn't necessarily take itself too seriously. It is a very, very good murder mystery.
Oh,
but what I
absolutely.
find in difference to, say, the TV show Agatha Christie murder mystery sort of thing, or Murder, She Wrote, I think it's called, is just that those almost take themselves too seriously. Like, this is a very serious plot, and you have all of the clues laid out so that you can figure out the murderer. This one's like, he died. He also wrote murder mystery novels. That was his whole bread and butter, which makes this entire thing seem way larger than life than it probably is. And we're going to lean into that and lean into the fact that they're all a bit ridiculous because they're super rich. And I just love that about the movie.
I do think that Daniel Craig's Benoit does a really good job of making us fully understand that this story is not going to take itself completely seriously, because we've got this southern like molasses in July kind of detective who is so clearly passionate about solving mysteries, but then also has this warmth and joy about speaking to people, learning new things about cases and uncovering mysteries and solving puzzles, that you just can't take this film incredibly seriously, and as a result can't critique it. You can't critique it in a way that is harsh beyond its purpose.
Yeah, it's really intriguing to me where we've been very, very nitpicky. Even with our last review, we were incredibly nitpicky of the movie despite enjoying it. Whereas I find with this one, I enjoyed it immensely because I found it really hard to nitpick. Like, even if I found something that I thought was stupid, it either came back up in the story later, and that's why it was stupid, which I will go back more into depth.
And I think as an admission for our audience, when we went to take notes on this film, we stopped pretty much halfway. We stopped taking notes pretty much halfway through because we both just wanted to enjoy watching it. And it's kind of the first time we've ever done that, where we stopped really taking in-depth notes and looking at this from a critical eye, because there was so little to critique, but so much to like look at and enjoy. And I think it would have not done the film justice if we didn't actually enjoy it, which does feel like a bit of an excuse for us not taking notes. But when it comes down to it, I think that is really a good milestone of a really good film, is that you can't really just pick it apart. You have to watch it to really get to grips with it.
Yeah, and I think it's really speaks to how much detail is in this movie. I think I might have said this about Sicario when we watched it as well, but it's one of those movies that you almost have to pause it every 5 seconds if you want to write a note. Otherwise you will miss things. And this one, because of its inherent nature of not taking itself too seriously, and a lot of the details coming back around as either foreshadowing or something that you think is stupid, you're like, why is that there? And then they're like, because of reason you thought we forgot, but we didn't. Like, you just want to watch it. You don't want to have to take notes on it. And even though we didn't take notes on it, we could still probably talk about this film for longer than its runtime.
Oh, God,
because it just has so much details packed.
Yeah, absolutely. Genuinely, this film does a lot with a little palette, in a sense. In not that I'm saying color palette, not at all, because it does a fuck ton with its color palette, but in terms of story, it hits a lot of different beats and addresses a lot of different discussions beyond just the murder mystery. Like, it actually has a discussion about wealth divides, but not in the same way that most films discuss wealth divides. In that, in other films, you'd usually see them discuss that the wealthy don't fully understand the issues of the poor, and like that is definitely visible in this film, but it's more has like a discussion about how each person treats each other based on their upbringing, despite wealth, and despite whether you come from a wealthy or a poorer kind of state. And though there is a very clear divide in that the wealthier definitely treat the poorer characters, specifically Marta, in a way that is definitely that they see her not as a member of the family, though they do posit that a lot, but as a part of the furniture. And it's a very interesting kind of commentary on this, where it feels like it takes a different kind of path towards this point, where other films would go directly to it, whereas this film kind of ekes around it and actually still depicts the wealthier people as thinking that they're doing the right thing, as opposed to outwardly kind of like kicking her while she's down.
Yeah, it's very interesting because in a lot of other movies, if we were to comment on this same wealth divide, for example, in The Joker, it's very, very blatant that the system doesn't care about you, and the rich people
at one point they even say that in that film.
Yeah, exactly. The system doesn't care about you. Rich people see you as little less than dirt on their boot, you know. Whereas this movie does it in such a different way, where every single family member has at least one line where they refer to Marta as part of the family, she works for our father, but really she's one of us. And
they genuinely don't think that they genuinely think that they're being really nice to her.
And I absolutely love the way that that's handled. It is something, I know that I've said this a couple times, but just inherently, because it is a murder mystery, it is a secret filled around the circumstances of death type of movie, we really can't get into a lot without spoiling it, even
exactly.
if we talk about more than the first 5 minutes.
There's too much going on, and if you haven't watched it, like, what are you doing? Go watch it. Finish this episode first, but like, go watch the movie because it's great.
Definitely like the podcast, leave us a review or a comment, and then go and watch the movie. But it really is one where you need to tune into the in-depth if you want to hear anything about the story or any of our actual thoughts, just because of how vague we have to be. We're
giving away a lot of surface level stuff, how we felt about it, how much we enjoyed it, be getting the spoilers, and looking away from that kind of stuff and looking at it on a surface level. But genuinely, this film is so worth watching and so worth your time, I think.
I could probably watch this film twice in one day and still love it, and that may be a little bit because it is a bit of a hyperfixation of mine. Like, the first time I saw it, I was like, oh, you're living rent-free in my head for the rest of my life, buddy. But also, I genuinely think it is that good, and it is one of those movies that you can rewatch a couple times just because of how much is hidden in the details, and how much, upon second watch, once you know the plot, a lot of things that you will pick up on just inherently by knowing what actually happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think before we get to our final thoughts, I wanted to quickly just say how genuinely nice it is, because Knives Out really does serve as a symbol of what you can achieve if you actually make films that you want to make, and when a director makes something that they're actually genuinely passionate about. And this goes beyond just the director, but I wanted to start with Rian Johnson, who is the director of this film. He put so much of his heart and soul into making this film, and as a result it ends up being incredibly enjoyable to watch and rewatch, even in the same day, as you said, Monique. But in terms of box office, it had a budget of 40 million and took home a box office of 311 million. So ultimately incredibly successful, incredibly well liked by many people, and I rarely hear a bad review about it. But the previous film he did before Knives Out was Star Wars: The Last Jedi, which many people did not like. For many, they would consider it definitely a black spot on Rian Johnson's career or catalogue of films. We're not going to talk about what we think of it because we'll get around to it one day.
Will we?
Maybe. Who knows? In a sense, that was a film that had a great deal of pedigree behind it and a great deal of history behind it, so there was this need to fill a role and to fill the shoes of something that came before that was critically loved, and as a result there was this pressure to work on something that you may not have necessarily been passionate about. Whereas with Knives Out, there is love in this film. There is a love sewn into every single little stitch of it, and so much effort to make it not only good, but to make it great. And as a result, it's something that will continue to be loved and rewatched for years and years and years to come. It may even become a classic, and I would not be surprised if it did. But with all that said, I think we should get on to our final thoughts. What did you think of it? And if you could give it a rating scale of bloody shoes, what would you give it, Monique?
Well, for this movie, I am giving our first 10 out of 10 on the podcast. I rated it 10 out of 10 bloody shoes. I just love everything about this movie. It's got all of the small crafted details and the sheer camp nature of the film, the fact that it doesn't take itself too seriously, and the fact that you can almost palpably feel the enjoyment that the actors are getting out of playing their roles. It just gets me jiving. Like, I could watch it, like I said, twice in the same day and still come out with details I hadn't seen before and an appreciation and love for the film.
That is a very nice way to put it, Monique.
Mm-hmm.
For me personally,
what about you?
I quickly changed my score as you were talking, because as we've been talking about it, it really put a little more into perspective, and I'm going to actually raise my score just a bit, not to a perfect score of 10 out of 10, but because I'm harsh but fair, I think, I'd like to think, and I'm giving it a 9 out of 10, Bloody Shoes. I think this film carries itself incredibly well. It's one of the better murder mysteries of the past decade, for sure, and the format has really allowed for each and every character to shine. I love that they've given Daniel Craig a character who is genuinely jovial and happy and intelligent, but not beyond realms of recognition.
Make more than 5 expressions.
Yeah,
he really does enjoy using his face to look anything.
Oh
other
yeah,
than
absolutely. And
or
I could talk in depth about it. I love that they've given Lakeith Stanfield a great deal to work with. I love that Christopher Plummer genuinely has this warmth on screen, and it's beautiful, but it's not a perfect film. It's got flaws, and that's what makes it great, but I definitely don't think I'm going to give it a 10 out of 10, but I definitely think it has earned every ounce of that 9 out of 10.
I am being biased with my 10 out of 10, but you know what?
Yeah.
I don't care.
That's fine, you're allowed to be biased. But
I'm
with
not
all
the
that...
one that went to school for filmmaking.
Yeah, exactly.
I can be biased
if I gave away 10 out of 10s every single week, I think people would question my credibility.
I would question your credibility.
Yeah, exactly. So people have to really earn 10 out of 10s. They've got to make a movie specifically for me. And
it's got to be very, very
And then I'd give it a 5 out of
tastes.
10 because it was pandering. Because like I said, I'm harsh, but fair.
Fair enough.
But with all that said, we're going to wrap up for this week's review. I hope you enjoyed it. Please feel free to reach out to us. As always, our links are on Twitter. I am at Grey Mouse Inc. and on Twitter, Monique is at Nexitai. She's also at Nexitai on Instagram, and I am at Will_Mortlock on Instagram as well. Monique is more responsive on Twitter, and I am more responsive on Instagram. Be sure to check each of us out. For me, I post a lot of cinematography stuff on my Instagram, so be sure to check that stuff out. For Monique, she always posts updates on the podcast and regularly gives out a refresh on the hint every single week. Be sure to check out our in-depth review, as we talk a lot more in-depth about this film, and we pick it apart, little bits that we loved, a lot of bits that we loved, the bits that maybe we weren't necessarily so happy about, and more specifically I wasn't so happy about because Monique loves this film.
I have nothing to be mad about.
For this week's Pointless Research, I'll be doing just a bit of trivia, and you will be able to get the hint for next week as well, which I hope you will all be looking forward to. But with all that said,
this will be, one of my more favourite episodes that we've done, just because of my love of this film, so do tune in to see me just fangirl horrendously.
But with all that said, see you next week.